What would you do if the person you loved, the one you thought was your future, called you unattractive, cheated on you with a teenager, and left you humiliated? Most people would move on. But me. I made sure his betrayal cost him everything. And the best part? 20 years later, I just made sure it still haunts him. If you've ever dreamed of serving cold, delicious justice to someone who wronged you, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready. Because this isn't just a revenge story, it's a saga. A story of betrayal, humiliation, and the kind of karmic payback that took 2 decades to fully unfold. You know, sometimes life has this way of convincing you that everything is happening for a reason. Like the universe is setting the stage for the perfect love story. And back in the 90s, when I was just a college student figuring myself out, that's exactly what I thought I had stumbled into. This wasn't just some casual fling or dorm room romance. No, this felt like destiny. I was young, wide-eyed, hopeful, and I met him. For the sake of this story, let's call him Jake. College in the 90s, a world that feels like yesterday and forever ago if you didn't live through it. Let me paint a picture for you. This was the 90s, before smartphones, before social media, before you could stalk someone's entire life with 2 clicks. If you wanted to talk to someone, you either called their landline and prayed they were home, or you wrote an email and waited. Days, sometimes. Life was simpler, but also slower. Music on cassettes, mixed CDs burned with care, thrift store flannels, and those long, dramatic phone calls late at night where your hand would cramp from holding the receiver for hours. If you were lucky, you had your own line in your room. Most of us. We whispered in the kitchen, twirling the cord around our fingers, hoping no one else picked up the extension. That's the world I lived in when I met Jake. The meeting that felt like fate. We crossed paths through mutual friends. He was a few years older than me, 23 to my barely 20, and already felt established. Mature. He had graduated, while I was still working my way through undergrad. There's something magnetic about someone just a step ahead of you in life. It felt like he had this direction, this confidence, that was both intimidating and irresistible. And then, fate stepped in. Jake had been accepted to a graduate program across the country, literally on the opposite coast. And wouldn't you know it? I already had plans with friends to move about 90 minutes from the exact city Jake was headed to. We laughed about it the first time we realized. It felt like the universe was winking at us, like, see, I'm putting you 2 exactly where you're supposed to be. When you're young and in love, you grab onto signs like that with both hands. You tell yourself, this isn't coincidence. This is destiny. And in the beginning, destiny felt really, really good. Early love and family warmth. Jake wasn't just some guy with a degree. He was charming in that confident, slightly cocky way. He had this smile that made you feel like you were in on a private joke, and he had a family that just pulled me in like a warm blanket. He had 2 sisters and a younger brother, and from the very start, they treated me like one of their own. There were game nights, inside jokes, that easy kind of closeness you only get with siblings who really like each other. It wasn't just dating Jake, it was like being absorbed into this whole new world of people who laughed with me, shared secrets with me, who made me feel like I belonged. For a college girl far from home, that kind of acceptance is priceless. I wasn't just falling in love with Jake. I was falling in love with the life around him. Weekends with Jake. Because I was working while he was in grad school, I was usually the one making the 90-minute drive to see him on weekends. Looking back, I can still picture that highway, how the sun would set over the road, the radio static fading in and out between stations, the anticipation building in my chest as I got closer to his house. Jake was renting a place with 2 roommates, both fellow grad students. It wasn't glamorous by any means, hammer-down furniture, mismatched dishes, posters tacked to the walls. But to us, it was perfect. Money was tight. Nights out were rare, but we didn't care. Taco dates, cheap beer, sitting on the floor playing cards, those moments felt like the heart of young love. He had this house full of life, too, because Jake wasn't just studying animal sciences. He was breeding small animals in his spare time. Hamsters, reptiles, the occasional exotic pet. To him, it was second nature. To me, it was fascinating. Walking into his place felt like stepping into a miniature zoo, tanks bubbling, the smell of wood shavings, cages rattling as tiny creatures darted around. And Jake loved it. You could see it in his eyes, how passionate he was about it all. And when you love someone, you start loving what they love, too. Mary, an unexpected mentor through Jake, I met people in his program. Friends, professors, colleagues. But there was one person who stood out, Mary. She was the wife of Jake's advisor, a woman in her 50s, sharp as a tack, warm as the sun. Mary worked in administration at the university, and somehow, despite the age gap, she and I clicked. While Jake was in class or the lab, I'd sometimes meet Mary for lunch. She'd listen to me ramble about school, about Jake, about life. She had this calm wisdom, the kind you can't fake. It felt like having an aunt I never knew I needed, someone looking out for me in this new world. In hindsight, Mary would become a far more important figure than I ever could have guessed at the time. The sweet routine of young love those 2 years with Jake felt like the kind of love story you write in your diary with little hearts around his name. Long drives, staying up late watching movies, whispered plans about the future. Sure, we were broke. Sure, we lived on cheese, crackers, and instant noodles. But we were together, and that made it all feel rich. I remember lying on his bed, sunlight spilling across the sheets, the hum of tanks bubbling in the background, his hand tracing lazy circles on my arm. We'd talk about where life was going to take us, his research, my career, maybe one day marriage, maybe kids. It felt secure, like the foundation of something real. And yes, there were little cracks. Jake could be dismissive, sometimes arrogant. He liked control, liked things his way. There were moments where I felt like I had to prove myself to him, to keep up. But back then, I brushed it off. I told myself, that's just how grad students are. They think differently. He loves me, that's what matters. And love has this way of making you blind to the tiny red flags waving in the distance. The foreshadowing one night stands out in my memory. We were lying in bed, the room dim, the house quiet. Out of nowhere, Jake made a little comment about how I didn't get the scientific names he used. He smirked, teasing, but there was something sharp behind it. It was a small thing, but I felt a sting. Like, why did he need to put me down in that moment? Why did I suddenly feel less than, lying there next to the person who was supposed to love me most? I laughed it off at the time. But if I'd known then what was coming, I might have seen that moment for what it really was, a hairline fracture in the glass. A crack that was about to split wide open. And that's where the story of my sweet, destined romance starts to shift. Because love, as I was about to learn, isn't always what it seems. Sometimes it's just the setup. The calm before the storm. And Jake. He was about to show me exactly who he really was. I still remember the first night I met Jake like it was yesterday. He was 23, just a few years older than me, but at that age those years feel like an entire lifetime. I was still fumbling through undergrad, barely holding together a plan for my future, and here was this guy who already seemed like he had the next decade mapped out. He was tall, with that kind of messy but intentional look, jeans a little worn, hair that probably hadn't seen a comb that day but somehow fell into place anyway. And then there was the way he carried himself. Confident. Maybe a little too confident, but in a way that pulled people in. He was the kind of guy who looked like he knew something you didn't, like he was already 2 steps ahead of you in conversation. We got introduced through mutual friends at a gathering, nothing fancy, just a bunch of broke college kids crammed into an apartment living room, music buzzing from a boombox in the corner. But when Jake started talking, the whole room sort of blurred out for me. He had this way of speaking, measured, passionate. And he was studying animal sciences, working toward his PhD. I'll admit, I was hooked right away. Not just by the subject, but by how alive he seemed when he talked about it. He described his projects, the animals he worked with, the bigger picture of what he wanted to do. He had ambition. Drive. And when you're 20, meeting someone who seems to have it all figured out, it's intoxicating. But it wasn't just him talking at me. We fell into this rhythm, one of those rare first conversations where you don't even notice time passing. We went from laughing about stupid things like how awful the campus coffee was, to talking about the future, our goals, our plans. And that's when the universe seemed to nudge us together. Because Jake mentioned he was moving across the country for grad school 3,000 miles away. And my jaw nearly dropped, because I already had plans to move with friends, just 90 minutes from where he was headed. It was one of those goosebump moments. The kind that makes you lean back and think, this can't be coincidence. This is meant to be. The weeks after that blurred into early courtship. It wasn't fancy, none of us had money, but it was ours. We'd grab tacos from a hole-in-the-wall place and laugh about how two people could eat like kings for $5. We'd take long walks around campus, sit under trees, and dream about what life could look like once we both moved. He took me to parties, introduced me to his friends, and in those moments I felt like I was stepping into a bigger, brighter world. Jake was charming, no doubt. Ambitious, too. But there was a streak of arrogance under the surface, a little smirk when he thought he knew more than you, a tendency to talk at people instead of with them. Back then, though, I brushed it off. When you're 20, it feels like the universe wrote your love story, and I thought mine was just beginning. Most weekends, I was the one packing up my little car and making the 90-minute drive to see Jake. It didn't matter if it was pouring rain or if I just finished a long week of classes and work, I'd roll the windows down, crank up a cassette mix, and let the miles melt away. That drive became a kind of ritual, almost like crossing a bridge into another life. And when I pulled into his driveway, it really did feel like stepping into another world. Jake shared a house with 2 other grad students. From the outside, it looked like any other cheap student rental, peeling paint, a sagging porch, half-dead plants by the door. But inside, it was alive. Not because of the people, though his roommates were friendly enough. No, it was alive because Jake had turned it into something between a lab and a miniature zoo. There were tanks lined up along the walls, humming with little air pumps. Wire cages stacked neatly, wood shavings on the floor, the faint smell of hay and feed. Tiny eyes blinking back at you from the shadows. Exotic reptiles basking under heat lamps. Hamsters running tirelessly on squeaky wheels. It should have been overwhelming, maybe even off-putting, but I loved it. Because when Jake walked me through each cage, each enclosure, his whole face lit up. He knew every animal's story, every quirk. His passion was infectious, and I couldn't help but be drawn in. I found myself asking questions, soaking up everything I could. It made me proud, in a way, to see how brilliant and dedicated he was. And I wanted to support him in any way I could, even if that meant sitting on a couch surrounded by squeaks, chirps, and the occasional lizard tail flicking against the glass. But it wasn't just about the animals. Jake's world opened up to me in other ways too. His siblings welcomed me like family. His sisters and younger brother didn't treat me like the girlfriend they had to tolerate, they treated me like I belonged. Movie nights, inside jokes, casual hangouts where I wasn't on the outside looking in. For a girl far from home, that kind of acceptance was everything. And then there was Mary, Jake's advisor's wife. She was in her 50s, sharp and warm at the same time. While Jake was buried in his studies, Mary would sometimes meet me for lunch. She had this way of making me feel seen, of asking just the right questions, of gently offering advice without ever sounding like she was lecturing. Those afternoons with her felt like having an aunt in the city, someone rooting for me, someone reminding me I mattered too. Slowly but surely, Jake's world became mine. His roommates, his family, his mentors, his animals. I wasn't just dating him, I was building a life inside of his. And back then, it felt solid. It felt safe. Looking back now, it's almost heartbreaking. Because at the time, I really believed I'd found not just a partner, but a second family. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my whole world. Those long drives back and forth became the rhythm of our relationship. 90 minutes doesn't sound like much now, but back then it felt like a pilgrimage, me with a beat-up car that rattled on the highway, armed with a mixtape and a thermos of gas station coffee. The drive gave me time to daydream, to imagine the life Jake and I were slowly building together. By the time I pulled into his street, I was already smiling, already rehearsing in my head the little things I wanted to tell him about my week. That anticipation, it was intoxicating. Like each visit was a fresh start. And the visits themselves. They were simple, but they felt like magic. Midnight snacks of crackers and cheese in the kitchen when everyone else was asleep. sharing a blanket on the lumpy couch, watching whatever VHS tapes his roommates had lying around. Long talks that stretched into the early hours of the morning, where we mapped out our futures like cartographers sketching uncharted lands. Jake talked about advancing in research, maybe running his own breeding program one day. I pictured myself by his side, maybe with kids running around, maybe with a house full of pets. We were young, broke, and a little reckless, but it didn't matter. When you're 20, you don't need fine dining or vacations. You just need someone who makes you feel like you're building towards something. And with Jake, I felt like I was. But if I'm honest, there were cracks. Tiny ones. Jake had a way of correcting me when I asked questions about his work. Not mean, not outright cruel, but sharp. Like he enjoyed reminding me that he knew more, that he was the expert. I'd laugh it off, tell myself it was just the nature of dating a grad student deep in his field. Sometimes he'd brush off my opinions about other things too, music, politics, even what we should eat for dinner. It was always subtle, wrapped in a smile, but there was an edge to it. Looking back, those moments were like faint warning bells in the distance. But at the time, they were easy to ignore. Because for every dismissive comment, there was a soft kiss, a thoughtful gesture, a plan we made together that felt so real I could almost touch it. One night, after a particularly long week, we ended up sprawled across his bed with the window cracked open. The air was cool, and for once, neither of us was talking. We just lay there, side by side, staring at the ceiling. And out of nowhere, Jake said, "You know, we could really make this work long term." Those words lit me up. Because that's what I wanted too: stability, permanence, a future. I remember smiling in the dark, already picturing wedding rings and kids with his messy hair and my stubborn streak. That's the cruel thing about betrayal. It never shows up when you're bracing for it. It waits. It waits until you're comfortable, until you've convinced yourself you're safe. It strikes when your guard is down, when you've already started to believe in forever. And back then, wrapped up in Jake's world, I believed with every fiber of my being. One weekend stands out in my memory more than most. I'd just finished midterms, exhausted but giddy to escape for a couple of days. I drove out to Jake's place, and for once, the world seemed calm. No deadlines, no stress, just us. We spent Saturday doing absolutely nothing monumental: grocery shopping, cleaning out the animal cages, cooking a cheap pasta dinner with whatever we had in the fridge. But that night, stretched out on his bed with the window cracked open and the sound of crickets drifting in, it felt perfect. We joked about the future, about how broke we were but how one day we'd laugh at it from the comfort of a real house. I teased him that our kids would probably inherit his messy hair, and he smirked, saying hopefully not my inability to keep a plant alive. We laughed, tangled up in the sheets, warm and content. And then, just for a second, the air shifted. I had been talking about my own plans, how I wanted to chase opportunities in my field after graduation. He looked at me, silent, then gave this faint chuckle. "Well, sure, but let's be real, you're not exactly in the sciences." It was casual, almost playful. But it landed like a pebble cracking glass. I brushed it off, told myself not to overthink. And soon we were kissing again, the moment swallowed up by comfort. But looking back, that was the first shadow. The faintest ripple under smooth water. Because life with Jake felt almost too perfect. And we all know how those stories end. It was supposed to be one of those easy weekends. The kind where nothing special happens, but everything feels right. We'd gone out for cheap Chinese food, fried rice, egg rolls, the works. The kind of meal where you leave stuffed but happy. By the time we got back to his place, I was in sweats, curled up on his bed, feeling safe, feeling comfortable. And that's when it happened. Jake glanced over at me, not with the softness I was used to, but with this faint, critical smirk. Then he said it, casual, almost tossed off, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "You know, you're starting to put on a little weight." I froze. For a second, I wasn't even sure I'd heard him right. The words didn't fit in that room, not in the space that had always been my escape, my comfort. I laughed it off at first, brushing my hand over my stomach and making some half-hearted joke. But inside, my chest went tight. My face burned hot. Because here's the thing, when you love someone, you hand them your softest parts. You let them see you unguarded. And the cruelest thing they can do is take those parts and use them as weapons. All night, those words replayed in my head. Every time he reached for me, every time I caught my reflection in the mirror, I heard it again, put on a little weight. Was he disgusted by me? Had he been thinking it for weeks, just waiting to let it slip? I told myself I was being sensitive, that maybe he hadn't meant it the way it sounded. But then I remembered the look in his eyes, that smirk, that flash of superiority. Like he was assessing me, not loving me. That night, lying next to him, I kept replaying the timeline of our relationship. Every late-night snack, every lazy Sunday morning, every time I thought he'd looked at me with affection. Had there been judgment there too? I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I went silent. I smiled when he kissed me goodnight, but behind my eyes, I was unraveling. And the thing about unraveling is that it doesn't stop with one tug. That comment wasn't just about weight. It was about power. About control. About him reminding me that no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I loved, he could always make me feel small with just a sentence. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. After that comment about my weight, something in Jake's demeanor shifted. He wasn't the same warm, excited guy I had first fallen for. Now, he was sharper. Colder. His words carried little barbs I couldn't ignore. If I mentioned my job, he'd shrug and say things like, "That's nice, but it's not really academic, is it?" If I brought up an article I'd read, he'd smile that patronizing smile and correct me on some tiny detail, always slipping in the Latin name of whatever animal was mentioned, like flexing his superiority was part of daily conversation. At first, I brushed it off. Relationships have ups and downs, right? But then came the call. I still remember holding the phone to my ear, pacing my apartment, the nervous rhythm of my socked feet against the hardwood floor. His voice was steady, almost clinical. No hesitation, no regret. Just, detached. "I think we should break up," he said. My chest tightened. "Why?" And that's when he said it. The line that still makes my blood boil 20 years later. "You don't know enough about science." Silence. I thought I'd misheard. "What?" He repeated it, slower this time, as if explaining a fact to a child. "You don't know enough about science. I can't really talk to you the way I want to. You don't understand the terms. You don't get the depth." I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. Not enough science. As if love required a prerequisite course load. As if my worth as a partner could be boiled down to whether or not I could rattle off the Latin name for a salamander. The heartbreak came first, the sting of rejection, the ache of realizing someone you trusted just casually cut you loose. Then came anger, hot, sharp, the kind that leaves your hands shaking. And then, laughter. Dark, bitter laughter that bubbled out of me because the excuse was so absurd it felt like a parody. This man, who ate gas station burritos for dinner and barely remembered to pay his water bill, was acting like Einstein turning down an intern. "You don't know enough science," I repeated back into the phone, choking on laughter. "That's your reason?" He doubled down, insistent, self-righteous. And with that, something inside me shifted. The pedestal I had placed him on crumbled into dust. Because here's the truth, it wasn't just an excuse. It was cowardice dressed up in academic arrogance. He thought he could cut me down, make me feel small, so that he wouldn't have to admit the real reason. But that truth was coming. And when it did, his whole world would start to crack. I could have let it go. I could have taken "you don't know enough science" as his final word and walked away, confused and brokenhearted. But that's not who I am. A week after the breakup, Jake came by to drop off a couple of things I'd left at his place, an old sweatshirt, a book, nothing important. He expected it to be simple, in and out, no questions asked. But the moment I saw his face, something in me snapped. I folded my arms, blocking the doorway. "Cut the crap, Jake. What's the real reason?" He blinked, caught off guard. "I told you. We're not compatible intellectually." I laughed, sharp, bitter, nothing like the easy laughter he used to know. "That's not it." You think I'm stupid enough to believe you ended a 3-year relationship because I don't know the Latin name of a hamster? Try again. His jaw tightened. He shifted his weight, eyes darting everywhere except my face. That's how I knew. The truth was there, hiding in the silence between his excuses. Jake, I said slowly, my voice low, who is she? He flinched. Just slightly. But enough. I pressed harder. There's someone else, isn't there? That's why you've been cold. That's why you made that comment about my weight. You wanted me to break up with you first so you wouldn't have to be the bad guy. His mouth opened, then closed. Defensive sputters, that's not fair, you're twisting this, but his face told the story long before his words did. Finally, he sighed, like a man confessing under duress. Her name's Meg. My stomach dropped. I knew the name. A freshman, barely 19. I'd met her once or twice at his house during barbecues. She was sweet, a little shy, nothing remarkable. She's one of my students, Jake muttered, almost daring me to judge him. She gets it. She understands science. She's eager, curious. She actually listens. There it was. The smugness, the self-importance dripping from every syllable. He wasn't talking about love. He was talking about an audience. About someone who worshipped him instead of challenging him. My blood boiled. She's 19, Jake. 19. You're 26. And her teacher. Do you realize how pathetic you sound right now? He crossed his arms, defensive. Don't be dramatic. It's not like that. She's mature for her age. And honestly, it's easier. She doesn't make me feel small. Those words hit me like a punch. Small. That was the core of it. I had seen through him too many times, called him out when he was being arrogant, refused to let him steamroll me. Meg. She probably hung on his every word, wide-eyed, grateful for the attention. And he liked that. He needed that. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to throw every memory we'd built in his face and watch it shatter. But instead, I started laughing. Not the kind of laugh that comes from joy, but the kind that bubbles up when the absurdity of it all hits you like a tidal wave. You broke up with me because I don't know enough science, I said, tears in my eyes from laughing too hard. But really, it's because you wanted a teenager who makes you feel like a genius. God, Jake. You're not a brilliant academic. You're just a coward with a fragile ego. His face turned red, but he didn't deny it. He couldn't. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. The heartbreak was still there, raw and heavy. But it was joined by something sharper. Something colder. Rage. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was insult stacked on top of injury, cruelty wrapped in condescension. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't going to let him walk away clean. Not after this. After Jake left that day, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying everything like a movie on repeat. The weight comment. The sudden coldness. The not enough science excuse. And now, the truth about Meg. Piece by piece, it all clicked into place. He hadn't just woken up one morning and decided to break up. He'd been laying the groundwork for months, planting little digs, poking at my insecurities, chipping away at my confidence, hoping I would be the one to crack. Hoping I'd storm off in a dramatic exit, freeing him to play the wounded victim who tried his best. That was the plan. His coward's way out. And the more I thought about it, the funnier it became. Not haha funny. The kind of laughter that starts low in your chest and builds until you're doubled over, because if you don't laugh, you'll scream. This man, this self-proclaimed genius, this ambitious grad student, couldn't even break up like an adult. He had to stage it. Manipulate it. Hide behind the flimsiest excuses he could dream up. You don't know enough science. You're gaining weight. You make me feel small. Each line replayed in my head, more pathetic than the last. Was this really the great academic mind I'd fallen in love with? A man too spineless to admit he was cheating with a teenager. The rage was still there, burning hot. My chest hurt from it, my hands trembling. But layered over the rage was something else, clarity. He wasn't untouchable. He wasn't brilliant. He wasn't even brave. He was just a scared little boy hiding in a grown man's body, desperate for validation from someone too young to know better. And in that realization, something inside me shifted. The heartbreak. Still raw, yes. But it no longer owned me. The tears. They dried up. Because in the grand scheme of things, I wasn't the one who should be embarrassed. He was. For the first time since the breakup, I felt a spark of power return. And that spark whispered one simple truth: if Jake thought he could manipulate me into walking away quietly, he had chosen the wrong woman. Because I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to make sure he felt the full weight of what he'd done. And trust me, Jake had no idea just how much damage I was capable of when pushed to my breaking point. The weekend after Jake's confession, I got an email from one of his roommates, George. He was kind, thoughtful, the opposite of Jake's smug arrogance. He'd heard what happened and offered to help me collect the last of my things from the house. When I showed up, George greeted me with a sheepish smile and said, "Honestly, I think you deserve a real night out. Let's blow off steam. Drinks, dancing, the works." My treat. There was no pressure in his voice, no ulterior motive I could sense, just genuine kindness. And maybe, just maybe, a little spark of something else. I agreed. Not because I wanted a rebound, but because I wanted to live. To feel like myself again after weeks of being diminished. And that night, for the first time since the breakup, I laughed. Really laughed. George wasn't Jake, he didn't talk down to me, didn't measure my worth in academic trivia. He just wanted me to have fun. But under that laughter, another current was stirring. A plan. When we returned to the house after bar hopping, the universe handed me an opportunity. Jake and Meg were curled up on the couch, watching TV like the smug little couple they were. And there I was, in a short dress, tipsy, with George's arm draped casually around me. I didn't even have to try. Every step across that living room was a performance. George, bless him, leaned into the act, helping me down the hall, laughing too loudly, deliberately leaving his bedroom door open just a crack. Later, we cranked up the performance. A few over-the-top giggles. A playful moan or two. Enough for Jake and Meg to hear every syllable. Was it petty? Absolutely. Did it feel good? Oh, you have no idea. The next morning, I made sure to cement the humiliation. I walked into the kitchen in last night's wrinkled dress, hair a tangled mess, while George, shirtless and glowing with mischief, beamed at me like I was a queen. I grabbed a powdered donut from the counter, took the slowest bite possible, and locked eyes with Jake. "You don't have to act like a whore in front of me," he spat, voice dripping with bitterness. I smiled sweetly, powdered sugar dusting my lips. "Have fun with my leftovers," I said, before George leaned over and kissed the top of my head. Meg looked mortified, her face burning crimson. Jake. He looked like he'd swallowed glass. That breakfast was the pettiest, most satisfying meal of my life. But deep down, I knew I wanted more than pettiness. I wanted justice. While Jake sulked, I got to work. His biggest pride wasn't Meg, or even his studies, it was the exotic menagerie he kept in that house. Tanks, cages, enclosures, rare animals he bred and sold for extra cash. And I'd paid attention. I knew the rules, the paperwork, the corners he'd cut because he didn't want the government in his business. One Saturday while Jake was out, George let me walk through the house with a disposable camera. I snapped everything: tanks too close together, improper housing, and the crown jewel, the illegal species Jake kept hidden in plain sight. Click, click, click. Every photo was another nail in his coffin. It wasn't just petty anymore. It was bigger. Jake thought he could manipulate and discard me without consequence. But he had underestimated me. The next step was Mary, Jake's advisor's wife. Mary wasn't just kind, she was sharp. She'd become a mentor figure to me over countless lunches, and I trusted her. So I told her the truth. Jake wasn't just cruel, he was unethical. He was sleeping with a student. I forwarded her the emails where he admitted it in writing. Her silence on the phone was chilling. "He's jeopardizing his entire career," she finally said. "Don't worry. I'll make sure the right people know." That was the beauty of it. I didn't have to lie. I didn't have to exaggerate. I just had to shine a light on the truth Jake worked so hard to hide. As it turned out, I wasn't the only one sick of Jake's ego. His roommates, George especially, had been biting their tongues for years. Now, they were ready to speak. Together, they drafted formal complaints to the university about Jake's relationship with Meg. They spread the word quietly in the program, making sure the women in his classes knew he was sleeping with a student. It wasn't gossip, it was exposure. Pulling the mask off the serious academic and revealing him for what he was, a man abusing his position. Act 3 closing beat, 200 to 300 words. When I look back on those weeks, it almost feels cinematic. The drunk performance. The powdered donut. The click of a camera shutter echoing in my head. The hushed conversations with Mary. Each piece was small on its own, but together they formed a plan. A carefully woven net tightening around Jake, thread by thread. The audience might think this is where the story ends, with Jake embarrassed, whispered about in his department, maybe a little humiliated at home. But oh no. This was only the beginning. Because what started as petty revenge was about to snowball into a career-ending avalanche. It was a Saturday morning when George tipped me off. "They're coming today," he whispered over the phone, his voice equal parts nervous and gleeful. "Wildlife officials. Probably a whole team." I hung up and sat there for a moment, heart thudding in my chest. This was it. The moment everything I'd been quietly setting in motion would finally come crashing down on Jake. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. I drove by the house casually, like I was just another neighbor running errands, and parked far enough down the street to stay out of sight. From that distance, I could see the driveway, the front lawn, the garage where Jake kept most of his tanks. The morning was still. Birds chirped. A sprinkler ticked lazily across someone's yard. For a brief, surreal second, it almost felt wrong, like the universe should have given me thunder, storm clouds, some dramatic cue. Instead, there was only quiet anticipation, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Then they arrived. First one, then two, then three black government SUVs turned the corner, their engines humming low and steady. Behind them, a box truck with a government seal rumbled into place. Uniformed officials stepped out, clipboards in hand, radios crackling on their belts. They didn't hesitate. They moved with practiced precision, fanning out across the property like they'd rehearsed this raid a dozen times. Neighbors peeked through blinds and cracked open doors. Curtains shifted. The whole street was about to witness the truth Jake had been hiding for years. And Jake. He wasn't even home. It was Meg who opened the door, still in pajama shorts and a messy bun, clutching her phone like a lifeline. From my car, I couldn't hear the exact words, but I didn't need to. Her face said it all: confusion, then panic, then the kind of fear that crawls up your spine and settles in your throat. The officials didn't wait for her permission. They walked in like they owned the place, because legally, they did now. Within minutes, the quiet morning shattered. The sharp bark of orders echoed from inside the house. Secure that tank. Check the labels, document everything. Careful with that enclosure. Dogs barked wildly from the backyard. The metallic clatter of cages rang out as officials carried them down the front steps. A stack of aquariums rattled as they were wheeled out on dollies, glass catching the sunlight. The sound was relentless, a chorus of chaos, dismantling Jake's so-called empire piece by piece. I sat in my car, hands wrapped around the steering wheel, soaking in every second. For so long, Jake had strutted around like he was untouchable, a king in his castle surrounded by his rare specimens. And now, his kingdom was being stripped bare, cage by cage, while his 19-year-old girlfriend stood helpless in the driveway, tears streaking her face. Meg was frantic. She fumbled with her phone, calling Jake again and again, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch the desperation. "Jake, you have to come home. They're taking everything. I don't know what to do." But the officials weren't interested in her tears. They ignored her questions, her protests, her trembling voice. To them, she was just background noise. They were here for the animals, for the evidence, for the law Jake had been breaking with smug confidence for years. At one point, an officer held up a small mammal in a carrier, calling out a name from his clipboard. Another shook his head, scribbling something down. illegal, unregistered, contraband. Every time I heard that word, my chest warmed with grim satisfaction. The neighbors had gathered now, clusters of them standing at the edge of their lawns, whispering behind hands, eyes wide. Everyone had known Jake as the animal guy, the science grad with the exotic pets. But this was a spectacle. A scandal unraveling in real time. Meg's sobs grew louder as the box truck doors slammed shut on the first load of confiscated animals. She ran back inside, then back out, as if she could stop the process by sheer will. But there was no stopping it. This was bigger than her. Bigger than Jake. And that was the delicious part. He wasn't even there to defend himself. He wasn't there to posture, to argue, to spin some clever excuse. His empire was collapsing without him, and he'd returned to nothing but the wreckage. One of the officers gave Meg a clipboard, pointing to a section where she had to sign. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the pen. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered the smug look she'd worn curled up on Jake's couch, the pride in being chosen. Now, all that pride was dissolving in tears and public humiliation. By the time the raid wound down, the driveway looked barren. The tanks, the cages, the stacks of supplies, all of it was gone. What had once been Jake's pride and joy, the centerpiece of his identity, was now evidence locked away in government trucks. Meg stood in the yard like a ghost, her face blotchy, phone still pressed to her ear even though no one was answering. And me. I sat there in my car, hidden in plain sight, and smiled. Because for the first time, justice wasn't abstract. It wasn't a fantasy in my head or a bitter wish whispered into a pillow. It was real, it was loud, it was undeniable. Jake's empire was gone. And this was only the beginning. Jake's animals had always been his pride, but his crown jewel was the EPA research grant. He bragged about it constantly, chest puffed out like he'd already earned tenure. Most grad students dream of this, he'd say, looking down on everyone else. Me? I've already secured funding. I'm basically set for the future. He wore that grant like armor. Proof that he was smarter, more ambitious, more important than the rest of us. Which is why it was so sweet when Mary leaned across the table during one of our lunches, her voice calm and measured, and dropped the bombshell. Did you hear? His grant's been revoked. I almost choked on my coffee. Wait, what? The committee flagged his misconduct, she said, stirring her tea like she was discussing the weather. Improper housing of specimens. Unethical research practices. He's blacklisted. He'll never get another federal grant again. She let the words hang there, almost savoring them. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, and he owes repayment on the unspent funds. Around $30,000, I think. $30,000. It was like the universe had handed me a gift-wrapped box of justice with a bow on top. I didn't have to imagine his reaction, because George filled me in later. He said Jake stormed through the house like a hurricane the night the official letter came. Doors slammed so hard the walls rattled. Books thrown across the room. He paced the hallways, shouting at anyone who crossed his path. Idiots. They're all idiots, he bellowed, waving the letter like a weapon. They don't understand real science. This is a witch hunt. Meg cowered on the couch, trying to soothe him, but he turned on her too. This is your fault. You let them in. You didn't stop them. She burst into tears, but that didn't stop him. His roommates tried to calm him down, only to get caught in the blast radius. He accused them of betrayal, of not standing up for him, of feeding the investigators information. In reality, he had no one to blame but himself. For all his arrogance, for all his posturing, Jake had built his reputation on a foundation of lies and loopholes. And now that foundation had crumbled. The animals were gone. The money was gone. The future grants he counted on like oxygen, gone. He wasn't a brilliant academic anymore. He was just another disgraced grad student, broke and blacklisted, lashing out at anyone within reach. George told me that at one point, Jake punched the wall so hard his knuckles bled. Then he slumped down in the hallway, clutching his head in his hands, muttering over and over, "This can't be happening. This can't be happening." But it was happening. And I'll admit, when I pictured him sitting there, blooded hand pressed to his forehead, surrounded by the wreckage of his own ego, I smiled. Because this wasn't just embarrassment. This was ruin. And the best part? We weren't even finished yet. If the wildlife raid stripped away Jake's animals, and the revoked grant gutted his finances, then what came next was the final nail in the coffin, his reputation within the university. The rumors had already been spreading. George and the other roommate made sure of that. Everyone knew Jake had been sleeping with Meg, one of his undergrad students. At first, it was whispered in hallways, half suspected. But once Mary and a few others filed official complaints, those whispers became paper trails. There it was, in black and white, a 26-year-old teaching assistant carrying on a relationship with a 19-year-old student he was supposed to mentor. It wasn't just unethical. It was forbidden by university policy. One morning, Jake was summoned. Word was, the letter arrived slipped under his door, stamped with the department seal. George later told me Jake had stared at it for nearly 10 minutes before opening it, as if sheer willpower might change the contents. But in the end, he had no choice. He walked to the administrative office that afternoon, head high, suit pressed, still clinging to that air of superiority. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. He sat stiffly in a chair across from the department chair, a senior professor with decades of experience and zero patience for excuses. The man read aloud from a thin stack of papers, his voice flat, clinical, but every word hit like a hammer. Formal complaint of inappropriate conduct with a student. Failure to disclose conflict of interest. Negligence in research ethics. Loss of federal funding. Each charge piled onto the next until even Jake couldn't pretend this was just a misunderstanding. He tried to argue, of course. He leaned forward, palms open, voice rising. She's an adult. She wanted to be with me. This is just jealousy from my peers. They don't respect me because I think differently, because I'm ahead of my time. The department chair didn't even blink. This is not a debate, Mr. Last name. This is the conclusion of an investigation. And then came the verdict. Effective immediately, Jake was terminated as a teaching assistant. His scholarship was revoked. Without funding, he could not remain in the PhD program. He was given the option to withdraw quietly, with a downgraded master's degree, or face expulsion on record. Jake sat frozen. His entire future, everything he bragged about, everything he lauded over me and everyone else, was crumbling in real time. And outside that office, word spread like wildfire. Grad students whispered in corridors, pretending not to stare when he passed. Professors who once offered polite nods now turned cold, eyes sliding past him as though he didn't exist. Invitations to study groups, research projects, department mixers all vanished overnight. George told me it was like watching someone turn radioactive. No one wanted to be near him, in case the fallout stuck. Even Meg looked miserable. She walked beside him on campus, eyes down, avoiding the glares from other students. Once, she snapped at a classmate for calling her teacher's pet, but the insult had already stuck. She became just as isolated as he was, dragged down by the weight of his disgrace. Jake's swagger? Gone. Instead, he stomped through the hallways, jaw clenched, muttering under his breath. His arrogance had curdled into bitterness, his pride into paranoia. And here's the part that still makes me smile. Jake had always told me I could never understand his world because I wasn't scientific enough. That I'd never be able to keep up. But when the end came, it wasn't his brilliance that saved him. It was his cowardice. He didn't leave with honors, or accolades, or respect. He left with scraps, a consolation master's degree, paid for only because his father bailed him out one last time. The golden boy of the program, the self-proclaimed future professor, was finished. His career in academia was dead before it had even begun. And everyone knew it. If Jake thought his humiliation would stay contained within campus walls, he was wrong. Because soon, it spread to the one place he couldn't bear to lose face, his family. I had loved his siblings like my own. His sisters especially, warm, funny, protective in that way older sisters can be when they see their brother finally settling down with someone solid. During the years Jake and I were together, they'd welcomed me with open arms, folding me into their traditions, their inside jokes, their late-night kitchen gossip sessions. For a while, I truly felt like part of their family. So when the truth came out that Jake had tossed me aside for a 19-year-old student, it wasn't just me who felt betrayed. His sisters did too. One of them, the blunt one, supposedly looked him dead in the eye and said, "You threw away a good woman for a teenager. Are you serious, Jake?" Another sister rolled her eyes and muttered, "God, you're pathetic," before walking out of the room. It wasn't said lightly. This wasn't the playful ribbing siblings throw at each other. This was real disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than anger because it comes wrapped in shame. Holiday gatherings became tense. Conversations stalled when Jake entered the room. Where there used to be laughter, there was silence, his presence dragging everything down. No one wanted to ask about his work, because everyone already knew there was no work. No PhD, no grant, no animals, no bright future. Just wreckage. Through mutual friends, I heard his parents were livid. Not just about the scandal, but about the embarrassment. Jake had been their pride, the one they bragged about at neighborhood parties, the son who was supposed to go further than anyone. Now, instead of boasting about his research, they avoided the topic altogether. When pressed, his mother apparently sighed and said, "We don't talk about Jake's program anymore." And that's the thing about pedestal living. When you fall, you don't just hit the ground. You drag down everyone who was holding you up. His sister's disgust, his parents' shame, it all cemented his downfall. For the first time in his life, Jake wasn't the golden boy. He was the disappointment. And I'll admit, hearing that gave me more closure than any revenge plot ever could. After the smoke cleared, Jake was left with nothing. No PhD. No job. No scholarship. No grant money. No animals to fuel his ego. The once confident grad student, the man who strutted around campus with his chest puffed out, who lectured me about not being scientific enough, was reduced to drifting. I'd occasionally hear updates through mutuals or the academic grapevine. He waited tables for a while, then bounced between odd jobs. He'd start something, quit, move on. No stability. No credibility. Just a string of almosts and maybes. Meanwhile, his peers. They graduated. They defended their dissertations, published papers, started families, landed tenure-track positions. They became the professionals Jake always claimed he was destined to outshine. And him. He became a cautionary tale. Whispered about in classrooms, "Don't be like Jake." The arrogance that once defined him evaporated. In its place was bitterness, paranoia, and the occasional attempt to rewrite the story, tell people it was politics, or jealousy, or an unfair system. But the people who knew, they knew better. And me. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't even need to tell my side of the story. His own actions had been enough. Watching the arc of his downfall was satisfying in a way that words barely capture. Because in the end, Jake got exactly what he wanted. I was the one who walked away first. But it wasn't because I wasn't good enough. It was because he was. He wanted me to carry the guilt. Instead, he carried the consequences. And me. I walked away free. Life has a funny way of balancing the scales. For a long time, I didn't hear much about Jake, and honestly, I didn't need to. After we split, I threw myself into my own path. I worked hard, paid my bills, built my career brick by brick. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And unlike Jake's carefully cultivated house of cards, my foundation was solid. I learned to measure success not by the grants you brag about at dinner parties, but by the quiet dignity of stability. I rose through the ranks in my field, earned respect the slow way, and eventually found myself standing on stages, delivering lectures to packed halls. It wasn't just about career success, it was about building a life on my terms. Meanwhile, Jake never escaped the wreckage he created. The stories trickled in over the years. He never got back into a PhD program, his academic reputation was toast. No university would touch him. So he went back to what he knew, breeding animals. But without proper licenses or funding, it was never the grand enterprise he'd once bragged about. Just cages in a basement, Craigslist ads, and whispers of "isn't that illegal?" hanging around him like a bad smell. And yes, he married Meg, the 19-year-old student he'd blown up his life for. For a while, I thought, maybe that's his punishment. Let them stew in mediocrity together. Let the man who thought he was destined for greatness settle into a life smaller than he ever imagined. But karma wasn't done with Jake. Not yet. Here's the detail that always made me smirk. Jake's family never really warmed to Meg. His sisters, those same women who once wrapped me into their circle, never forgave him for trading me in for someone younger, someone more malleable. They tolerated Meg, sure, but they didn't embrace her. She was never one of them. And over the years, I'd still hear from his sisters, from his parents. Not in a meddling way, just casual check-ins, holiday cards, the kind of contact that says, "We still see you as family," even if he didn't. Meanwhile, Meg was on the outside. No matter how many years passed, she was never more than Jake's wife. That kind of quiet rejection stings deeper than outright hostility. And Jake knew it. He'd wanted to prove he'd upgraded. But every Christmas dinner, every birthday gathering, every family milestone reminded him, his family thought he'd downgraded. And me. I didn't need to lift a finger. His family did the work for me. Fast forward 20 years. By now, I was firmly established in my field. I was invited to give guest lectures at universities across the country. My name was on publications. My career, built without shortcuts, without shady grants, without sleeping with students, was thriving. That's when it happened. I was scheduled to give a lecture at a mid-sized university. Just another day, another stage, another opportunity to share what I'd worked so hard for. I walked into the hall, my notes in hand, and froze. Because there he was. Jake. Older, grayer, heavier around the middle. The arrogance had dulled, replaced with something tighter, more desperate. He wasn't attending my lecture. No, he was there for an interview. For a teaching job. The irony nearly knocked the breath out of me. The man who once told me I wasn't scientific enough to keep up was now hoping to claw his way into a job in the very system that had spit him out decades earlier. And the best part? He didn't recognize me at first. I didn't confront him. I didn't need to. Instead, I did what I'd learned over the years, let the truth do the work. During the post-lecture meet and greet, faculty members introduced Jake to me. And oh, the look on his face when realization hit. His jaw clenched, his eyes flicked away, but it was too late. Polite conversation followed. Surface-level chatter, nothing heated. But when one of the hiring committee members casually asked, "Oh, do you two know each other?" I smiled. "Yes," I said sweetly. "We go way back. In fact, I was around when Jake lost his EPA grant." I didn't elaborate. I didn't accuse. I just placed the truth on the table, like a seed waiting to sprout. You could see the committee members exchange glances. Curiosity piqued. Questions unspoken. Because if there's one thing academia loves, it's gossip wrapped in fact. And sure enough, a few days later, I heard the outcome. Jake's offer was withdrawn. The background check had surfaced everything. The revoked grant, the university misconduct, the black marks he'd never been able to scrub away. The job he thought would finally redeem him slipped right through his fingers. When I walked away that day, I didn't feel giddy. I didn't feel cruel. I felt free. Jake had once engineered our breakup so that I'd be the guilty one, so he could walk away clean. But life doesn't work like that. You don't get to rewrite reality. The truth catches up. Sometimes you don't need to lie, or embellish, or scream to the world about what someone did to you. All you have to do is place the truth in the right hands. And the truth about Jake was this: he wasn't a genius. He wasn't ahead of his time. He wasn't destined for greatness. He was a coward, a fraud, and a man who destroyed his own future by underestimating the woman he thought he'd left behind. In the end, Jake didn't just lose me. He lost his career, his credibility, his family's respect, his second chance. And me. I walked away free again. Justice isn't always instant. When Jake first broke me, I wanted the world to see him suffer right away. I wanted lightning bolts, sirens, handcuffs. But life rarely gives us instant karma. What it does give us is time, and time is far more ruthless. Because here's the truth, people show you who they are, eventually. You don't have to rush it. You don't have to fight to expose it. All you have to do is trust yourself, walk away, and let them burn their own bridges. Self-worth isn't defined by someone else's shallow judgments. Jake once tried to reduce me to a number on a scale, to the fact that I wasn't scientific enough. For a while, I believed him. But looking back, I see how ridiculous that was. His insults weren't about me. They were about his own insecurity, his desperate need to feel superior. And when people operate from ego, their downfall is inevitable. Karma works best with a little nudge. I didn't forge documents, or spin lies, or invent scandals. I just pointed people toward the truth. The wildlife officials, the grant committee, the university board, and, years later, a hiring committee that needed to know who they were really considering. That's the secret. Sometimes revenge isn't about fire or fury. Sometimes it's about patience, restraint, and letting the truth land where it belongs. So if you've ever been made to feel small, if you've ever been told you're not enough, remember this. Their words don't define you. Their downfall doesn't need your destruction. Because the sweetest revenge isn't screaming at the storm. It's standing tall when the sky clears, smiling, and realizing you never needed them to begin with. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? And of course, subscribe for more stories like this one. Because trust me, karma always comes, sometimes it just needs a little nudge.